Thank you for the excellent talk, Kai. Just welcome everyone again. This is going to be a very interesting and packed day. So if you need any restroom, please try not to interrupt the section, and feel free to use the door here to exit. And the bathroom is on the ground floor. And if you need Wi-Fi, you can ask one of the staff for the passcode. Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Mutlu Cukurova. Professor Cukurova is a distinguished professor of learning and artificial intelligence at UCL Knowledge Lab at University College London. Professor Cukurova's research focuses on harnessing AI to enhance learning environments and drive educational innovation. He's a leading voice in AI in education, working on projects that bridge technology, learning sciences, and real-world applications. We're honored to have him share his insights with us today. So please join in welcoming Professor Mutlu Cukurova to the stage.
I'm not sure if the clicker is going to work, but it's perfect. I'm okay with this, thank you. Well, good morning everyone. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction and honorable invitation in the first place. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mutlu Cukurova. I do AI in education, and today I try to put together a talk that does not necessarily get into the specifics of the research papers that we have been writing and developing, but to give a broad, big picture presentation of the field, and perhaps try to challenge us a little bit around the hypes that are surrounding on the potential of AI in education. I would like to start by telling a quick introduction that relates to the different conceptualizations of AI in education. I cannot see if my slides are moving there or not, but that might be a technical issue. Is it? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Apologies for the technical issues that relates to the slides. I would like to start by telling you a little bit about the different conceptualizations of AI. These days, as all of you are aware, everybody is talking about the potential of AI. And this is also the case within the context of educational research and education implementations in real-world practice. On the one hand, AI technologies are considered as strategic opportunities to enhance teaching and learning practices. On the other hand, same technologies are criticized as challenges to human agency, pushing the boundaries of ethical practices in education, and exacerbating some of the existing inequalities in our education systems. A lot of the countries, a lot of the ministries of education across the globe are trying to make sense of this AI revolution and what does it mean for the future of education. And these kind of venues where different kinds of stakeholders, scientists, practitioners, policymakers, industrial representations are gathering together are excellent opportunities for all of us to push the discussion forward. When I talk about AI in education as part of my research and as part of my practice, I talk about three different AI conceptualizations. AI can be conceptualized to externalize, be internalized, or extend human cognition. In the externalization conceptualization, human tasks can be clearly described, mathematically modeled, and replaced in educational practice. In the internalization conceptualization, we can think about AI as computational opportunities, model generators, that can be presented back to humans so that humans' internal representation of thought can be changed. At the third conceptualization, AI can be used as an opportunity to extend human cognition as part of a tightly coupled human-AI systems. In this extended cognition conceptualization, it is really important to emphasize on the fact that this is expected to be a synergistic relationship, in the sense that the emergent intelligence out of this extended cognition conceptualization is expected to be larger than the sum of each agent's intelligence. If we try to map these different conceptualizations on the Ben-Schneiderman's coordinate of automation through AI versus human control, perhaps most educational technology could be considered as low automation tools with the low human agency allowance. These days, most of the hype and most of the existing AI implementations in education appears to focus on these externalization conceptualization that leads to the creation of tools that are replacing particular human tasks as part of high automation but relatively low human agency into the model representations themselves. Now, what is happening in the real world practice if these are the different conceptualizations? There was a very recent Department for Education report that has been just published by the UK government that looks at the use cases of AI in education, looking at the data from over 700 stakeholders. And of course, as expected, a lot of the use cases are associated with generating content, generating lesson plans, creating questions, helping with assessment and marking. Perhaps the most important point from my point of view in this data was that although not all teachers and practitioners agreed that AI could actually help them improve their existing learning outcomes, these technologies were considered as opportunities for productivity gains to improve the efficiency of their practices to save time. Now, productivity gains using model as a service, looking at the commercial AI tools, is potentially a very positive contribution to our education system, considering the existing workload of our teachers. But there are significant problems with the fact that in real-world practice in education today, almost all existing AI implementations are using commercially provided model-as-a-service approaches. There are significant issues with these that includes the cost and licensing fees, issues that are associated with the privacy and data security, issues that are associated with the transparency and explainability of the models, issues that are associated with the dependence on the connectivity. So one line of work within my own lab that we have been trying to push forward was the use of, and is the use of these relatively small-scale modeling approaches and techniques to be able to create potentially comparable models in terms of their performance to generate content in educational setups. And I think this line of work is extremely important. Another really important aspect that relates to the use of large language models and the commercial offers model as a service is associated with the sustainability issues of these models and their environmental impact. Of course, when we think about the productivity gains that are gathered out of this use of AI technologies in education, there are also significant issues that actually specifically relate to the unique contexts of education. For instance, although in most everyday life contexts, the goal of engaging in an activity is the successful completion of an activity, therefore AI conceptualized as a tool for productivity gains is very, very welcome. In pedagogical contexts, the goal of engaging in an activity is actually to learn from this experience in order to be able to perform it and understand the concepts that are involved as part of this practice. To give a very simple example, in the context of driving, if you are moving, if your main goal is to move from point A to point B efficiently and safely, then any kind of productivity gains to achieve this goal is very welcome. But if your goal is pedagogical while you are driving, in the sense that you are driving in order to be able to improve your driving skills, then the use of AI for a productivity gain might not necessarily be a very valuable intervention. Of course, we are not only talking about, when we think about AI in education, AI is an opportunity to look at teacher-facing interfaces. Let's think about the productivity gains in the context of AI in student-facing interfaces. This is a very interesting research that has been very recently published that looked at all the exam questions of a top EU university in all the faculties across all the departments and compared the potential of current state-of-the-field large language models on solving these questions. It was really surprising to most of the faculty members at this university that although they were thinking very carefully about the exams that they were trying to create, up to 80% and just over 80% of all departments' exam questions could actually be answered with the current state-of-the-field large language models. Now, what does this mean for our education? Is that if a student is utilizing GPT-4 for productivity gains, can actually get an engineering degree at a top EU university relatively easily. But is this a useful learning experience if students are gaining their productivity in terms of passing the exams? I would argue it is not. One way to deal with this problem is to start thinking about these AI models, large language models, as potential opportunities to be fine-tuned into behaviors of a real tutor. In our own lab, we have been looking at these fine-tuning approaches, trying to design AI technologies that would actually push students towards more Socratic engagement and reflective practice while they are working with AI tools, rather than the tool is answering all the questions that the model is asked for. One example of this is looking at the language learning. Here is what we are calling the full-length lab, which is a fine-tuned model that listens to the students while they are interacting with it, and rather than giving them the correct pronunciation or immediately correct grammar of their speech, it is actually pushing the student to practice what could be their potential mistakes and reflect upon why they have been doing particular grammatical mistakes regularly. In the essay writing context, we have been fine-tuning these models in order to be able to not to give a part of an essay for a student's submission, but actually encourage students to come up with their own responses to the questions that are posed within the essay. These kind of fine-tuning approaches are very valuable, but to me, their value is not even in the AI itself per se, but looking at the process of a student's interaction with these kind of Socratic large language models, we can actually start understanding not only what has been submitted to us as a final outcome product of an essay, of a language exam question, but understand how the students actually reached this particular point and what was the process of it. One example from my own lab again is looking at this student interaction with the large language models and trying to make sense of their process. We are looking at to what extent students' writing diversity has increased. We are looking at the regularity of our students' interaction with these models. We are trying to understand if the students crammed 2 hours before the submission deadline or have been working on the particular essay for the last 3 weeks. These kind of process analytics, I think, are the real values of the AI large language model use cases in education. I find it fascinating that a lot of the learning goals that we put ourselves as the core goals of our education are indeed process-driven. Oftentimes, we evaluate and assess these practices only looking at the final outcomes. And AI in education is actually an excellent opportunity to start thinking about process evaluations rather than looking at the outcomes, because these days, outcomes that we expect students to create are very easily created with the help of AI technologies, excuse me. Now, you might be saying that, well, that's not necessarily new, is it? Big companies, everyone else out there also are working on the fine-tuning of these models in ways that they would actually behave more like a tutor rather than just providing all the responses to the student questions. And I want you to listen, 30-second clip of some output of OpenAI with regards to their vision in this front, if I may. Thank you. Is there sound?
I'm make the AI tutor. Thank you. And I've always been interested in this space. I met with a new company this morning, or regularly in a company, it's like 2 people that are going to work on a summer project, trying to actually finally make the AI tutor. Like, and I've always been interested in this space. A lot of people have done great stuff on our platform, but if someone can deliver like the way that you actually like, and they used a phrase I love, which is this is going to be like a Montessori level reinvention for how people learn things.
Yeah.
But if you can like find this new way to like let people explore and learn in new ways on their own, I'm personally super excited about that.
Two people working on a summer project to finally actually make AI tutor, to deliver reinvention, Montessori level reinvention of how people learn things. How many of you here agree with this vision as a realistic vision? One. Two. Okay. That is an interestingly critical audience, which I do appreciate. When I present such talks to my colleagues, particularly who are coming from more CS and engineering backgrounds, including my own lab, people actually buy into these arguments very strongly. But let me take a step back and tell you a little bit more about the history of AI in education. AI in education as a field has been around for at least 4 decades, officially as a field, with the international society and international conference, international academic journals that are publishing on the AI implementations in education. We have multiple examples of being able to deliver effective tutoring in the context of maths, algebra, language learning, and I put here some of the examples, for instance, from my colleagues in Carnegie Mellon University of their Carnegie Learning, which has started in early 90s. These systems are not necessarily limited to digital traces of data either. In my own lab, with my own team, we have been working on what we are calling the multimodal learning analytics, trying to look at the sensor data from students' interactions in order to be able to understand certain educational constructs and their interaction with educational material. In this example, for instance, we have been looking at the seat pressure, students' heart rate data, and their facial images in order to be able to model their engagement with an intelligent tutoring system. These systems are also not limited to human-created content. We have been exploring in collaboration with Synthesia, looking at the potential of AI-generated content. Here, for instance, you can see one example of how advanced these AI models are with regards to creating educational content. Let me ask you one question. We did experiments on the comparisons of me going in front of a screen and recording a lecture of 4 minutes, 5 minutes, compared to the same content delivered with the help of AI synthetic generated media. Which one do you think did better, myself or the AI generated synthetic media?
Synthetic.
Synthetic? And how many people think that it was synthetic? Wow, about half. How many people thought that it was me? Oh, it's my accent, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, well, that might be actually a really good point to highlight. But we found no statistically significant difference in terms of the AI delivering the same content with the same pedagogy of direct instruction versus me delivering the same content with the same pedagogy of direct instruction. We also found no statistically significant difference in terms of the student's learning experience, which is fascinating because that can save a significant amount of time, again, for productivity gains. If you look at the literature on the evaluation of these systems, intelligent tutoring systems, adaptive learning platforms, and AI implementations, the evidence is quite clear. These systems can be superior to an individual tutor teaching to a cohort like this. It can be superior to an individual tutor teaching a group of students, but they are often inferior to an individual human tutor tutoring one-to-one another human student. Now, a core question for all of us, I think, to ponder upon is that if these kind of pedagogical approaches and the systems are not necessarily new, if the effectiveness of these systems is not necessarily new, the literature has been around for a while, why we have not really been seeing these kind of educational implementation in real-world classrooms? It is really important, and there are various reasons behind this lack of change in our education systems. First of all, it is really important to highlight that AI in education is a socio-technical ecosystem issue. Any kind of change we expect in our education systems require ecosystem-level considerations. In our own research, for instance, we have been looking at the teachers' adoption of AI in real-world classrooms and looking at the factors that are influencing influencing the teacher's decision on the extent to which they will adopt an AI technology or not. We have collected data from 800 teachers, and it was fascinating to observe that although tool-related factors were indeed important, ecosystem-level factors were actually more significant predictors of the teacher's adoption of these technologies. The extent to which a particular piece of AI technology will add to the workload of a teacher or not is a deal breaker. The extent to which there is a leadership buy-in in the AI potential is a deal breaker. The extent to which infrastructure and the support for the teacher is provided in schools is a deal breaker. So we had to start thinking about any kind of change in education systems as an ecosystem level problem rather than only focusing on being able to build the best AI products that are out there. There are also significant issues that are associated with the teacher's knowledge of and confidence in using AI technologies. I had the opportunity of leading an international expert group for UNESCO for the last few years, working on UNESCO AI competencies framework. So here you can see the most recent version that has been published at UNESCO Digital Learning Week in Paris headquarters. And I want to highlight here that although many people think that teachers' AI competencies are only about teaching them the basics of AI technologies or giving them the skills to use one particular tool, it is only one part of a much bigger holistic set of competencies. And we need to start thinking about all of these teacher training and competence development if we are to observe any kind of real-world impact of AI in education. In the real-world practice, also there are many teachers who are afraid of the fact that AI might be considered as a dehumanizing initiative of learning and education. Many practitioners have the impression that AI implementations are all about individual learners working in front of a screen without appropriate amount of human interaction. And that might be a significant challenge to break, so that we should start thinking about instructional approaches, instructional designs, in which AI is only one part of a much bigger picture where human-to-human interactions are still kept at the core of our education systems. I speak to a lot of teachers and students in my research. And it's fascinating, in the UK, most of the teachers are expecting AI to automate their assessment practices, because this is the most amount of work that they spend, their time, the most amount of effort they put into. When I speak with students, a lot of them are asking me, oh, how can AI help me write my assignments? Or exam, how can it help me answer exam questions? So in a very dystopian future, we might actually end up in a situation where students are using AI technologies to write their assignments. Students are using another AI tool to assess these assignments that were initially written by AI. So AI is heavily used in our education systems, but nobody actually learns, and nobody gains the satisfaction of flourishing their students. There is also significant concern with regards to the trust in AI recommendations. In our own lab, we have been investigating the perceptions of the same content being framed as coming from AI versus same text being framed as coming from other humans or other fields like educational psychology or educational neuroscience. And oftentimes, people trust less if the same content is presented to them as coming from AI. Now, similar results are emerging in the implementations of AI-generated feedback implementations, and there is a significant concern there. Now, that turned out to be relatively pessimistic, but that is not necessarily the case. I'm just trying to highlight some of the issues that we have experienced based on the 4 decades of AI in education research. And based on this literature and on my own experience in the field, I would argue that AI tools alone are very unlikely to democratize, which has been the case as promoted early on, or revolutionize education. I argue this with the unlikely statement in it, putting my doubtful researcher hat on. But I can be a lot more confident to tell you that it will certainly not be like 2 people working on a summer project. But perhaps we, as key stakeholders, can steer the change towards the right direction through these kind of inter-stakeholder collaborations and opportunities. That's why I very much appreciate this initiative from AGI Odyssey to bring people who are coming from different backgrounds as different stakeholders to start talking about these issues together. Now, in the beginning of my talk, I mentioned about 3 conceptualizations, and I will not have time to cover all of them, but I do want to conclude my talk only talking about one particular conceptualization in which AI is used as a tool to replace particular tasks. I wanted to briefly show other conceptualizations and what do I mean by them. If you think about the second conceptualization, this is the opportunity to use AI or computational models of digital traces of data on human learning as an opportunity to generate visualizations of lived experiences of learning so that we can represent these back to the learners and educators to change their own representation of thought. So in this context, we have been looking at the small group interactions for the last decade in my lab. So this is a typical teaching classroom that you can see in my own teaching, where small groups of students are working on particular design problems, or they have a code issue, they are trying to come up with a solution to a challenge that they were given to. In this context, if you take the first conceptualization of AI as a tool, you can collect multiple modalities of data. You can ask expert researchers, human evaluators to evaluate particular outcomes for you. And then that becomes a machine learning problem. How can I use this kind of input data and model it in a way to be able to predict particular clusters of students or particular classifications of students? You might say that I want to be able to model those students who are achieving the highest grades. These kind of interventions are relatively problematic if you are looking at these kind of constructivist learning environments. And these issues are associated with the challenge to human agency, accuracy of being able to model such complex social learning processes. And also there are significant issues that are associated with the fairness, bias, and transparency of the models that are used to model these. In our own work, we take a relatively modest goal, which is, can we make the lived learning experiences more clear, transparent, and talk about them more precisely with the help of these computational models. We use computer vision and natural language processes to be able to model students' nonverbal and verbal interactions and present these back to students for them to be able to more aware of what they have just gone through as part of their learning experience. And in our research, it is fascinating to observe that if you show this awareness, increase this awareness in students, this leads to particular amount of accountability of this awareness, which then in turn leads to regulation of particular learning behaviors. These kind of approaches also tend to improve students' motivation to engage in these kind of activities in the long term. I want to finish up without taking too much of your time and stay within the allocated half an hour slot by telling that the third conceptualization, where the human and AI interaction is conceptualized as an opportunity for humans to extend their cognition, is potentially a line of research and practice that we have not really explored as much. Currently, at best, the complementarity paradigm in education, for AI in education, is that we tend to give up our own agency to an AI tool for it to be able to complete a particular task for us. In education, we have to be very cautious what particular tasks we are allocating to an AI. Because in the long term, this task allocation and this cognitive offloading is very likely to lead cognitive atrophy on these particular tasks capabilities for humans. It's really important to think about what we are losing if we are giving this opportunity of task completion to an AI for productivity gains in education. If you think about the second conceptualization, these would be the models that are aiming to fade away as the students' competence at a particular task evolves, because they would not be appropriately enough to fit into the new paradigm of behaviors of students. Ideally, we would like to move towards this direction where the complementarity is aiming for extended cognition in which human competence increases as the amount of time spent with the AI tools. This is my last slide to conclude some of the core points that I wanted to make in this morning. To me, AI as an applied tool may be beneficial in education, but we should ensure that AI makes people more competent rather than becoming more dependent on AI. Unfortunately, current practice is heavily focusing on more dependence. Second point is the significant ecosystem level factors should be addressed for AI to genuinely make real world impact in education systems. That includes infrastructure, governance, teacher training, and assessment revisions, structure changes. AI models can also be used objects to think about learning, helping us understand and improve human learning throughout these processes. They are not only AI tools that are out there. And at last, applications of AI in education and the visionary direction in strategic policies must be informed by research evidence and multi-stakeholder dialogue like the ones we will be having for the rest of the day today. Thank you very much for listening to me, and that's me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor, for the fascinating talk. Now I'm going to open up to the stage. Anyone has any questions? Now it's time you can raise your hand. Our staff, can you deliver a mic? Thank you.
Hello. Sir, would you mind?
You raise an interesting point about the status quo where you might be moving towards students writing papers with AI, teachers grading them. And underpinning that, I mean, and it almost seems like there's this, like a power structure. If you want the good job, you got to go to the good university. To get in there, you got to pass the test. And why not use AI to get there? And it almost brings up like this, are we looking at it wrong? I mean, we're not going to wipe away the university system, the grading system, but you do point to an interesting thing of, okay, these tools can fine-tune the curriculum. Like I was trying to learn about partial differential equations. I looked at 20 different things. And then finally I found someone, he had these cool animations, he explained it step by step, he grounded it in the real world. And I felt like I learned something more in the 10 minutes of that than the hours looking at the other stuff. It would be great if we could get that for everyone. And it's almost as like, is there a way that you could see of like aligning that, learning how to, developing like an approach, like how could we use AI to help people more, to become more curious, to connect, new concepts to what they're excited about, and somehow surface that, perhaps as a complement to what we're doing today.
A brilliant point. Thank you for raising this. I think you're absolutely right that this should be the direction that we should be heading towards. But the issue is that oftentimes that comes down to the philosophy of education. Why do we need schooling and education in the first place? Unfortunately, in theory and a lot of the literature and rhetoric, it is about human development, flourishing. But in practice, oftentimes it turns out to be ranking of people into particular orders in order to be able to achieve these kind of pragmatic goals on who gets into a particular profession that there is limited space for. So that requires a shift in our thinking about the function of education in our societies. And I think AI is an excellent opportunity for us to use this crisis of outcome generation to move towards it being an opportunity to accelerate this level of change at the ecosystem level. The point that I was trying to make here is that I have no disagreement with your point, but building good AI tools will not get us there. So we need to start thinking about this as a more ecosystem level problem. And one of the first things, if you ask me where would I start from, because maybe many people would agree that it is an ecosystem system issue, but where do we start from is to look at our assessment structures and move towards more process evaluations where these kind of practices that you learned about differential equations can be evidenced as your mastery of the concept rather than you getting into a particular exam where you have to solve particular problems, regurgitating knowledge. We need to look at your learning experience, and assessment should be based on this learning experience and what competencies you developed as part of this experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there are a few more questions. I think there.
Sorry, did I just jump in with the questions? Mutlu, thank you so very much for the presentation, and actually you've taken some things that I will want to say, so I'm going to go faster afterwards over them. And I absolutely agree, that this is a chance to move towards a process-driven evaluation, and AI has given us this chance. But I'm going to try and challenge you a bit, because you talk about that last quadrant of yours. I actually like that, very nice structure. But you said human extended with AI is not yet happening, but I'm thinking that's exactly where we are right now. So from my point of view, being in this research area for so many years, I have seen that, first of all, AI started moving to classrooms. I see it with my own children. And what they're doing, I would pretty much classify as extending human with AI, because they're getting additional, so for instance, TT Rockstar, where they're doing a lot of multiplication that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So it is clearly an extension, and it's helping their learning. Or they have spelling little apps that they use, and they have some simple AIs, and then they're giving them some recommendations based on what they've done, etc. So why would you say that extended AI extended human, or human extending AI is not there yet, basically?
Right, thank you very much, Alexandra. I think, first of all, I'm glad to hear that there's an agreement that that could be a vision for all of us to work towards. With regards to your question specifically, I think that comes down to our definition and conceptualization of extending human cognition. To me, extended cognition theory implies a synergistic interaction between the tools and the human's cognitive architecture. Currently, AI models that are frequently used are not fit for these kind of purposes for at least two reasons. One is the stochastic nature of a lot of the most frequently used language models make them very difficult for humans who have evolved into extending their cognition with more deterministic tools. So this difference will require a certain amount of time and competency development from human point of view to be able to extend their cognition and cope with the fact that now we have to extend our cognition with these tools that have stochastics, which are likely to behave in the ways that are different than what we are traditionally used to working with deterministic tools. And the other aspect of it is that, to me, this extended cognition direction also requires, from both agents' point of view, human and artificial intelligence, to take mutual input in order to be able to update their own models of the real world. And unfortunately, we currently have excellent models of language, but these are not models of the real world, which makes it quite difficult to achieve this kind of externalization of cognition in the way that I would define it. Of course, there are also issues about the fact that these are limited to particular context purpose, and there are particular technical advancements, but I'm hoping that this will be happening in the future, and I think that's a really goal both from a technical point of view, but also from the learning sciences point of view to aim towards. If we can achieve this, then these tools can be a synergistic superstructure, like the Engelbert's arguments, on top of human cognition to help us achieve tasks that we would not be able to achieve otherwise. Thank you.
Great. There's one more on the stage.
Yeah, my question is with regards to the guardrailing and ethical implications. So, according to some studies that we managed to get done, in 2020, in the Western world, the majority of human beings were now being guardrailed by algorithms into reproduction. Basically, most of us need right? Now, if we look at it from a point of view of ethics, if we're training machines to teach us or learn to themselves, if we posit the very ethereal concept that AGI and ASI is even possible, I'm not going to go into that whole thing, but what can we do to guardrail the dangers? I mean, Asimov's laws of robotics were thought of back in the 60s when we thought AI was going to be robots flying us around. Now they're teaching us and replacing the issues, or basically replacing our creativity and thinking. My question is in two parts. The first, was that a consideration of the lab? Because generally I see a lot of people rushing to say, it's great, but then no one listens to Musk when he says we need to be really careful about this stuff because it's the ICBMs of the 21st century, right? Has that even been a consideration? And if so, what kind of ethical guardrails have been put in place in terms of research to make sure that those dangers are not, we're not actually part of the problem, we're actually considering solutions?
Thank you very much. Fascinating question. Of course, it's quite a big question as well, but let me try to attempt a couple of responses. One thing I would say is that, first of all, I think you're absolutely right that a lot of our current activities are currently structured with the fact that we have offloaded certain tasks into an AI for it to make a decision for us, which then had led to particular implications on how the society is operationalized. Your example of finding a partner is a really good example, but there are many other examples of these. So, to me, your question is at least twofold. One, it's an empirical question in the sense that I don't think we have enough evidence about the long-term implications of offloading our writing tasks to a large language model, for instance. And without this evidence, I think we are rushing way too fast into their implementations in particular contexts.
But no one's doing anything about it, are they?
I would disagree with this in the context of academia. For instance, almost every piece that I have just talked about and I presented to you are actually showing research studies looking at the particular impact of an AI intervention. But your response is absolutely valid in the sense that, unfortunately, very few of these tools that we are building in my lab are adopted in real-world practice. If I go to schools, they oftentimes adopt solutions that are provided to them from a different provider, not well-thought academic products. Now, what do we do about this is, again, I think associated with the power dynamics of the decision-making with regards to one, we should be informing our educators and our school system leaders and policymakers to move more towards regulatory approaches. And I would like to appreciate the efforts that have been put by European Parliament and European Commission with regards to EU AI Act. I think it's a very positive step forward, at least within the education context. That's my area of expertise. Even though it strongly suggests particular tools should be banned from education systems. And I think it's a good step because maybe they should be banned before we have a better understanding of what does this mean for all of us as a society. We have already given up so many things in our lives, and I hope that learning will not be one of these that we have offloaded to an AI model. Sorry, I can't really see your apologies because the dice is just directly behind.
I'll come see you later.
Sure, we'll be very happy.
Thank you. One more question here.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So I think we move from the factory model of education to more farming model, at least to Ken Robinson. I think he has an interesting perspective on it, imagine a future for us all. But maybe like one step before that, like what is the role in education? What are we trying to optimize for? And I think it should be critical thinking, curiosity, emotional intelligence. If we agree on that we're optimizing our models for that, how can we use AI to actually increase critical thinking and the role of emotions and the state of our well-being?
Thank you very much for the question. I 100% resonate with the argument that we should be aiming for the development of these kind of critical competencies that you have referred to. With regards to the AI use, actually, the example that I have given about a dystopian future where the human interaction is replaced with AI is one way to think about this if you are optimizing for cost decrease and economic gains. But in other implementations, there are a couple of really interesting schools which are coming from very affluent backgrounds in which AI is used as an opportunity to improve students' content knowledge acquisition on the topic of the day for 1 hour, 2 hours of the school time, and the rest 6 hours of the school time is actually spent on interacting with more able peers, interacting with mentors and coaches, during which you are focusing on this kind of lifelong learning, critical thinking skills. That implementation, that instructional design is a much more valuable instructional design if we are aiming for or optimizing for this kind of goals. The problem is that, unfortunately, a lot of the very affluent parts of the world and communities will be able to do this because they can increase the number of adult coaching that are required if you are shifting towards this direction. And a lot of the low socioeconomic schools will be using AI as an opportunity to optimize for economic gains, which will widen the current gap between the two categories, unfortunately. And it's a really worrying future for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final question.
Thank you, Doctor. I have 2 questions. One is about, you just mentioned data privacy, and there's also some worrying ethical concerns about the use of AI in education. And you also mentioned that we should try to use AI to enhance students' learning. How do you think that if we maybe put AI into application in education, how do you balance the ethical concerns and also the students' improvement? Second question is about, you mentioned that if we want to let the students to better behave and better learning with the help of AI, do you think the assessment, like the tasks, should also be changed as we add AI into our learning process?
Thank you very much for these questions. With regards to the privacy issue, that's not my particular area of expertise, so I'm sure there would be other colleagues who would have much more elaborate responses to this. But one of the significant attempts in my own lab as my team, what we are trying to work towards, is this idea of, can we actually start thinking about building small language models or small computational models that can be run within local contexts that would allow the opportunities with regards to the data privacy decisions to be locally made rather than being enforced upon the community in which these systems are implemented. That's one way to think about it and move towards this direction. With regards to your second question, I have to highlight, perhaps it wasn't very clear in my talk, when I showed this computer vision and NLP approach for the small group interactions, I did not really refer to any kind of better behaviors per se, or enforcing upon a particular set of behaviors. Our goal here is much more modest in the sense that it is more about making people aware of their lived experiences, and within the contextual setup, give them the opportunity to make decisions about their own learning behaviors, not necessarily saying or prescribing a particular set of behaviors. In the constructive learning environments that I have presented, these kind of decisions are very, very difficult to be made. What is initially or eventually good or bad behavior is a very difficult decision to make in such complex, dynamic, social constructivist learning environments, and you don't want to intervene into this equation, but what you can do, what we are calling in the field, is the open learner modeling approach, where you build a model of the lived experience, you open it up to the students and teachers, say that based on your contextual understanding, your curricular goals, this is what has happened, what do you think this means? So they start using these models as an opportunity to have more dialogic exchange and reflect upon. Not to say, tell them, this is what you should be doing because the model tells you to do it that way. I think it's very difficult to build this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give one more round of applause.